For the Pacific Radio Network, welcome to Planet Waves FM. My name's Eric Francis Coppolino, your host for the next hour or so. Today's program is for Tuesday, the 12th of July, 2016. A spectacular, beautiful, warm summer day here in Kingston, New York. Welcome wherever you may be in the world or in the future. It is good to be with you. There sure is a lot going on in the world right now. A lot of it is confusing. A lot of it is extremely painful. Some of it seems like it doesn't matter at all. Some of it seems like it will have profound consequences. And then there's us, there's you, there's me, in the mix of life, making sense of what is going on, trying to figure out what to do with ourselves and to decide what the right thing to do is in general. And I think that the events of the world as they are presenting themselves these days certainly come with many questions about, like, how are we supposed to feel in the midst of this? How are we supposed to respond? What are we supposed to be doing? And some question about where the trajectory of your individual life intersects with the wider life. Since we all now live at that crossroads, it's been rising on us like a slowly creeping tide for a while, as we've been documenting, looking at the Uranus-Eris cycle and the way that all of this electric media has surrounded us over the past approximately 90 years. The tide that has been rising is also a tide that has been washing away the inner sense of who we are, and it's come to the point now where, in many ways, a great many people live their lives inside out. I mean, even the most casual grandma posting to Facebook, posting family photos to Facebook, is, in a sense, living her life inside out. I mean, it wouldn't have been vaguely sensible, for example, 20 years ago, to take all of your family photo albums and make a display and hang it up in the supermarket. But when we do that, and we all do that to some extent, we're broadcasting our interior life, the life that's inside the four walls of our home, or inside what used to be the private sanctuary of the mind, out into the world. And I've expressed a lot of concern about this, and I am still concerned, mainly because the necessary and appropriate response to a world scenario and a scenario in one's own society, like we're seeing, where so many people are in pain and so many people are afraid, and where I think on all, for all of us, there's some level of fear about where this is all going, where a society that appears to be increasingly violent and decreasingly sensitive to what we need as people is it's a real concern. It's a real concern. And I'm concerned about a few things. One of which is why I've got to walk out of my house in my little town, where almost everyone knows everyone else to some degree, and almost everyone, except for like some lawyers strolling around coming home from lunch, are on their phones, focused on this little box and not acknowledging each other, not talking to each other. The proliferation of laptops and internet cafes is not that different. I admit I've spent plenty of time in cafes with a laptop open, but I also hold court, and talk to everyone basically. So it may still be contributing to the problem. But what I see, especially people plugged into earphones, staring into their screens, or walking around doing that, it's really pretty antisocial. And at the same time that we're experiencing this basically kind of degradation of a social environment that today most people don't even remember when the social environment was any different. This is at the same time, I believe, doing damage to an already damaged interior orientation that it takes to be a person. And so when I say that we're living our lives inside out and there's no such thing as as sort of private inner space, what I mean by that is that that the structure of what a person is who has a clear sense of their interior, which humanity worked a long time to get, you see, and which was lacking, sorely lacking at other times in history, other equally tribal times in history. Inner awareness and the presence of inner desire and a genuine inner orientation have never been easy to come by. And for a long time, our society at least worked to cultivate that in many different ways. And my concern is that that's really the thing that is being lost. I'm less concerned with the idea that people know stuff about us, although there's still a lot of tension about what people know and or shouldn't know. And there is still places that we're utterly embarrassed to open up about. And so it's as if our inner lives are trodden on by many people, some of whom belong there and some of whom don't. But then there is a kind of a last inner sanctuary, but it's barricaded. It's barricaded, and it seems to be with utter terror of anyone knowing what we have going on in there, to the point where it is arguable or demonstrable that many individuals don't even want to know themselves what is going on in what you might think of that as that last sanctuary of the self. And it may well be dark in there. There's a lot of pain concealed in there. There is darkness concealed, and there are all of the things that make us human. All of the basic ingredients of what it means to be a responsive, alive person engaged with yourself and in your own life. And with all of the guilt and the fear and the shame are also barricaded, all of those things that we actively seek and that we want. So to me, this spells a lot of tension between an individual and the group that inevitably surrounds them, whether that group are the people sitting in a cafe around you. The group may be your family, the group may be your Facebook friends, the group may be your Instagram followers or your whatever Snapchat followers. And if we are going to get out of this mess that society is in, and if we are going to learn how to live and feel better about our lives and to feel better about existence in total and do what we came here to do, we have some work to do. We have some skills to gather and some conversations to have. And there is an ever-increasing need for us to be real with one another. And this is not easy to come by. There's a lot of reasons that we're not supposed to be real with each other. So last week we experienced collectively, and some people in a very personal way, 2 additional shooting deaths of young black men at the hands of armed white police. One happened in Minnesota outside St. Paul in a town called Falcon Heights on Wednesday. A guy named Philando Castile was shot in his car, not threatening anyone. He had declared that he had a legally licensed weapon, as we are told over and over again, is one's right. And when he was reaching for his driver's license, he was shot to death by the police. And then the day before that, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, police shot and killed a guy named Alton Sterling while they had him pinned to the ground, immobilized, unable to harm himself or anyone else, and executed him on the spot. And this already had the attention of the country pretty riveted and people deeply upset. I mean, we're just hearing about this over and over again. And these are starting to seem like human sacrifices. At a certain point, we are going to wake up to the fact that this is wrong. We're going to wake up to the fact that we have to make many personal changes and structural changes in society so that, first of all, the armed police cannot, under the color of law, that is to say the claim of government legitimacy, kill whoever they want and every single time walk away from that. I can't think of one actual conviction in one of these cases that amounts to license to kill. And these were two extremely disturbing situations. And I would propose that anyone who's a Second Amendment advocate should be concerned particularly about the killing of Castile, because if, being in possession of a gun legally, according to what you perceive and what Justice Scalia perceived as your constitutional rights, your rights ain't worth shit if you're dead. You don't have any rights when you're a dead person, and so that's worth a think through from a number of different directions, including understanding the way in which a weapon has a tendency to escalate any situation and to make it particularly tense. I mean, even people who are taking martial arts training, where they're learning to defend themselves with their hands, are taught to be situationally aware. They're taught to de-escalate. They're taught to use minimal force. Generally, in any martial arts discussion I've ever had, it's come down to you do what you have to do and only what you have to do. And it seems as if people who are carrying firearms are not fully aware of the dynamic that the firearm sets up. There's the fantasy of what happens, and I'm sure that no one's fantasy of what it means to have secured a weapon legally. You do whatever you have to do. You go to court. You get all your references from people who've known you 10 years, as you have to do here in my neighborhood. That no one's fantasy of what it means to be carrying that gun includes being shot by the police when you're reaching for your driver's license, and mind you, in front of your girlfriend and her child. And I think we need to get past the fantasy of what this is about and look more closely at the reality. It seems that was happening. Even the NRA, I have heard, issued a statement saying that these killings by the police were suspicious. Maybe they finally spoke up because there was one of their constituents with a licensed firearm on him, but being black, he really wouldn't be one of their constituents, since I think they give a damn about the plight of minorities in the United States or anywhere for that matter. So the shock of this was still setting in when on Thursday night someone opened fire on a Black Lives Matter protest against police brutality in Dallas, Texas, an infamous city because President Kennedy was killed there in 1963. And the saddest part about this, apart from the loss of 5 police officers and 7 others being injured, some of them gravely injured, and some civilians being shot, is that Dallas was a city that was working incredibly hard to work out its differences with people. I have seen broadcast that they in recent years have had a drop of 83% in complaints of police brutality because they were working on their stuff. They had developed their community relations, and they had done their bias training, and they de-escalated. They learned to chill out. They learned to keep cool. And this was a protest where the police were involved in the planning of the protest, and protesters were taking selfies with the cops, and the whole thing was extremely mellow. And then 2 minutes before its scheduled end time, someone opened fire. A sniper, Army reservist, opened fire and started picking off police officers. The police officers were not wearing Kevlar because they were not thinking they needed to be in riot gear for this event. They were going to what, in fact, was a super chill event with no violence whatsoever until someone personally reached kind of a boiling point and started picking people off. This sent yet another shockwave through the country. Mind you, this was only on Thursday night. I'm recording this on Tuesday. That was only 5 days ago. That was very, very recently. And it is of concern how quickly these things disappear into the past and into the memory hole. But I think that the shock of this is all still pretty fresh, despite the tendency that the human ego has to, sort of glaze over the surface and make the superficial layer of things look all shiny. My impression is that there's deep pain and deep mistrust, and it is not going anywhere fast, and particularly not going anywhere fast as long as there is, first of all, what I would describe as a misunderstanding of why this is happening, and second, a lot of the wrong things and wrong people are being blamed. And if we ask ourselves what it's going to take to reverse this trend of increasing violence in our society, we have some real questions to ask. I think that no matter what it takes, no matter what you believe, that part of what it will be that helps reverse this is enough individuals awake to who they actually are, coming from a strong inner place, agreeing that we have to stop this. For as long as we are roaming around in total confusion, worse than I've ever seen it, about who we are, and indeed even whether we exist and whether that even matters, there's no reason for this to stop. It might not. It only seems to be increasing in momentum. And since we're, all connected by these little devices that are basically, I would say, corrupting our own interior sense of existence, we are being constantly injected with pain via these devices at all times. Headlines come across. You can't get away from it. People are talking about it on every possible venue, from your email account to Facebook to your news feed to you flip on the TV if you do that. And the increasing, let's say, assault of these shocking incidents creates a numbing down, a numbing out. The only thing to do at a certain point is to cut off. And so for as long as we're doing that, that is not going to bring the sensitivity and the inner awareness, which is going to mean the inner awareness of pain for a while. I think before there are cohesive ideas and before we resume or perhaps begin for the first time to relate to one another in a sensitive and civilized way in a wider culture. And this also reaches into our most intimate relationships. Those tend to be violent as well. One of the most serious forms of violence in our society is domestic violence. It is happening everywhere, almost all the time. Some households are exempt from physical violence. Many of them have a kind of emotional violence, callousness, insensitivity, and let's say unhelpful environment for the people who need the most help. And there are people who are living balanced lives and who are able to chill out and live. But that's a select few people who really feel pretty much okay and feel engaged in a positive way. And so I think the direction that we need to turn this whole discussion is inward, truly inward, in the sense of being able to be present for our feelings and to be present for our own emotional and psychological journey, to have enough inner awareness to heal the pain that we carry from, first of all, being products of our society, products of our families, in many ways, products of the moment that we are living in. Let's consider the astrology here. I'm going to do that pretty much throughout the rest of the program. And I didn't mention, by the way, my musical guest, Bob Dylan, making his umpteenth reprise at Planet Waves FM. I needed music that helped us with this. And so I proposed a playlist to my friends over at Camp Bob, where they handle, where Bob Dylan's music goes, and thumbs up. And so we're going to get a history lesson from Bob Dylan in a little while, 2 history lessons from Bob Dylan, in fact. So regarding the astrology, we are still in this broad sweeping moment under the influence mainly of one thing. And I know there's a lot of things going on in the planets right now. You could break down a lot of aspects and give them a kind of, you could argue for their significance. But the one that I'm focused on right now is the conjunction of Uranus and Eris. And the reason I'm focused on that is, first of all, because it is the rarest thing in the astrology right now. That's the thing. If you're doing, broad, sweeping cultural astrology, if you're interested in the biggest possible environment, the way it influences the most people the most deeply, you look at the things that are moving the most slowly. You look at the rarest events in the culture. And so that we have a conjunction now, and we haven't had one of those in a while. It's been since the 90s that we had a major planetary conjunction. That was Uranus and Neptune. Now we have Uranus and Eris. And every time Uranus couples up with another slow-moving outer planet, there is some huge thing that happens in the world. I mean, to give 2 examples, Uranus conjunct Pluto, 1960s. The whole scenario of the 1960s can be summed up in not only the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of 65 and 66, which had effects for at least another 10 years, but looking back at the whole Uranus-Pluto cycle. Similarly, Uranus-Neptune in the early 90s came with this complete rearrangement of geopolitics, the opening up of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union ceasing to exist, and suddenly we're hearing about dozens of countries that were never mentioned in grade school. That we just got this map with the USSR on it, and no one mentioned Estonia or Lithuania or Belarus or Ukraine or all those places. It was all just the USSR. That all suddenly changed, and many other things happened at the same time. Now we have the next in this series of Uranus conjunctions to outer planets. This outer planet that it's conjunct happens to be Eris, with a cycle of more than 5 centuries. This is unlike any planet that any living astrologer has used. It's true, Sedna has like a 10,000-year orbit. That was discovered in the early 2000s, but almost no one uses Sedna. And Sedna did not really have much of an influence on astronomy. And when Eris came along, that basically changed the way that we think of the entire solar system. So Eris is an important player, only discovered in 2005, so it's only even been on the radar for under 12 years, named in 2006. This is very recent for anyone to have an understanding of a planet. However, it's possible to see what this is about. And I first identified Eris as being about what I called at the time personality chaos, identity chaos, a kind of a psychedelic or perhaps not that pleasant experience of inner being. And this turned out to be modestly accurate. Add to that now Uranus, which has a kind of a radicalizing quality to it, and suddenly we're in this era of really extreme identity chaos, what Eric McLuhan described as the disorientation on the purpose of the body, or what his son Andrew described as basically a lot of people being out of body. And by out of body, you can do all the yoga you want, and you can still be out of body. It is where the locus of your consciousness is. That's the thing that tells us whether we're in body or out of body. And when we live our lives in the context of this big invisible thing, we are no longer the context of our lives. And so Uranus-Eris is creating this kind of, it's kind of an explosion, really. I wouldn't describe it as an implosion as much as chaos resulting from the sense of private space being completely invaded and exposed, with no real concept of how to build a private life, how to have the integrity of a private life. That then pushes us into group identification, which we see again with Uranus in Aries. This is a symbol of group Uranus identification, Aries, coupled with Eris, which is already a kind of a little chaos generator in Aries. And the way that I was able to connect this with digital technology is when you go back one Uranus-Eris cycle, which happens in Aries because Uranus moves so slowly, we got all those historical events right around the last Uranus-Eris conjunction, which was in Aries, associated with the rise of electronic media. The first TV broadcast, the first radio station licensed, and the patenting of the first transistor, which was never made that I understand, but that concept became the computer, which became the internet. And then one cycle later, we are in this bizarre state of there no longer being any genuine sense of I am. Now, outer planet events can be difficult to access. They're difficult to actually see and feel most of the time until an inner planet like Mercury or Mars or Venus or the Sun or the Moon gets in there. And the Sun and the Moon work better for natal charts. For example, if you're born in the mid-60s and you've got the Moon conjunct the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, you're going to be feeling that Uranus-Pluto conjunction your entire life. if, however, you're a society, the moon passes through, for example, the Uranus-Eris conjunction on a monthly basis. So there's not going to be much time to pull the focus on, or to give this thing involving planets that are extremely far away tangible reality. Now, though, we have that. And the way we have it, the reason we have it, is because of this Mars retrograde of 2016. Now, the Mars retrograde is over because Mars stationed direct on June 29th, a little less than 2 weeks ago. However, Mars is making its station direct. It stops, right? Mars stays in 1 degree for a long time when it stations retrograde or direct. And the degree that Mars is staying in is exactly 150 degrees away from the Uranus-Eris conjunction. That is an aspect called a quincunx, and it is considered a minor aspect by a lot of astrologers. It's not one of the Ptolemaic aspects. I'm generally not looking at too many quincunxes when I write the horoscope, for example. I'm more interested in things on the 90-degree axis, but sometimes, and many astrologers, by the way, would rightly argue or express that the quincunx is a vastly important aspect because of what it does, and we're seeing what it does right now because we have a long quincunx, because Mars is still, I think it finally left the degree where it's stationed. It's stationed direct at 23 degrees and change of Scorpio on June 29th. And now, finally, today, it's reached 24 degrees 9 minutes. It's finally left that 1 degree. So it was sitting in that 1 degree for about 3 or 4 weeks. 1 degree. And it's Mars. It's supposed to move quickly. Mars likes to move quickly. Mars is an action planet. But instead, it was slowly backing up into this 150-degree angle to Uranus and Eris, and then it seemed to stop due to the relative motion of the Earth. That's the retrograde. And then it began its move direct, but still staying there. So this is it's the kind of thing that if you were to look for when one happened, you would be very hard to find it. You might go through every Uranus-Eris conjunction that a computer can track, going back centuries, and not find a Mars station at 150 degrees. This is a totally unique event. So it's calling something into focus in a way that, at least for our lifetimes and for going back well into the depths of history, long before the American colonists, speculating here, but still, there have only been 3 or 4 of these Uranus-Eris conjunctions since the United States was even founded, right? Probably 3. And I would be happy to look, but this Mars station alignment is so unusual to happen. We can safely say we're dealing with something that is unprecedented. And what is so interesting is the way in which Mars is picking up on the themes of Uranus-Eris in Aries, Mars in Scorpio, and giving this scorpionic flavor to everything that is happening, and the flavor of Scorpio is coming across in shadow form, in unnatural death, in murder, and murder at the hands of power, and people who have not done anything to harm anyone, constantly being killed. As of last week, 505 people, according to Democracy Now!, I guess 508, according to the Washington Post, had been shot in half a year by the police. 505 people. And you wonder, wow, where's the response to that? Okay, so we're seeing some in the streets, but look what it is taking. Look how many people, and it has to... It can't just be about humanity. It has to be about the fact that the majority of these are black people, though many, black being a lie, it's really dark, darker flesh tone. There's no black people. My microphone foam thingy is supposed to be black. It really looks to me like 90% charcoal gray. There's no human that color. So we say black, but that's a lie. We say white, but that's a lie. And in any event, it's having to be these African American, the descendants of the original Africans. Many of them were brought here continually being killed at the hands of the white-dominated power structure over and over again. And finally, we're seeing any movement at all, and it is not much movement. At least people are speaking up. Some people are speaking up a little bit. And, you wonder what effect something like the sniper attack on 12 police officers can have. This would still be, I'm trying to imagine when I was a kid reading the New York Times and seeing TV news, would not nearly have faded as fast as it had. We have these events that would have dominated consciousness for a month in previous times, or for several months, happening several times a week now. And so what Mars, to me, is describing is where private individual consciousness, that's Mars, one's sense of self that confronts the world, that's Mars, where it meets this vast, huge, sweeping, collective thing described by Uranus conjunct Eris. And it's a collective thing that's had deep private impact because it's in Aries. So it's as if Mars has fled from Aries and taken up refuge in Scorpio, and in what you might describe as a life or death situation, right? Scorpio is really the sign of life or death, considering that it represents sex and death, and then everything that flows from those things. But the polarity of Scorpio is that it treats both sex and death approximately equally, and now Mars has fled there, and it's establishing a relationship to the collective, which has taken up residence in Aries. The private space of Aries has been completely invaded by the collective, this internet thingy described by Uranus conjunct Eris, and all the values and attitudes promulgated and self-concepts promulgated by the internet. And Mars, who still exists, who still can say I am, is sitting there in Scorpio asking a lot of questions and wondering what the holy heck is going on. And the thing that Mars, described in that position, is seeking is contact with its own feelings, its fear, its desire, its cravings, its passion, its love, its sense of grief and sorrow, its sense of wanting to live and celebrate life. And the 150-degree aspect creates, or just describes anyway, a focusing of a relationship where it's clear what's going on, where the positions of the parties are more obvious. And so at this moment, it's a little bit easier to see where you stand in relation to this vast collective thing that's completely invaded your mind, the internet, and turned you inside out, in which you have played along with and turned inside out. And Mars is calling you home to yourself. So in the next segment, let's talk a little bit about Mars calling us home to ourselves and what that might be about. I also want to talk about this question that's going around, which is the one about what non-African American people can do. Because there's lots of talk about that, and lots of talk about white privilege, which is also coming along with lots of white guilt. And really, anyone sensitive is just feeling the pain of this. And I'm not sure that this is the most productive subject that the privilege to kill that the police have is not merely a white privilege. Not the least of which because there are often African American and Latino officers involved, but it isn't. There's something else going on. I want to get into that something else. Bob Dylan has a clue about what this is. This is a song called The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. It was based on a 1963 incident. It was written in 1963, and so it was news at the time. But the thing about this song is that it sure doesn't seem like it happened that recently. Let's give this a listen, and then consider what Bob is saying to us here. Once again, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. Again, a visit to 1963. Bob Dylan. That was at Town Hall, a theater in New York City. Let's look up who Medgar Evers was. WikiGod telling us that first of all, a young man. He was assassinated at the age of 37. Medgar Wiley Evers, July 2nd, 1925 to June 12, 1963, was an African-American civil rights activist from Mississippi who worked to overturn segregation at the University of Mississippi and to enact social justice and voting rights. He's remembered for saying, "You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea." A World War II veteran and college graduate, he became active in the civil rights movement in the 1950s. He became field secretary for the NAACP following the 1954 ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education that segregated public schools were unconstitutional. Evers worked to gain admission for African Americans to the state-supported public University of Mississippi. He also worked on voting rights and registration, economic opportunity, access for public facilities, and other changes in the segregated society. Remembering, by the way, this is my commentary, that even in my lifetime, I was born in 1964, there was segregation. There were colored and black, there were colored and white bathrooms, there were colored and white water fountains, and this whole illusion of race was perpetuated by the structure of society. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine walking into a airport and there's separate bathrooms for black and white? And where do you go if you have one parent who's black and one parent who's white? Remember, black and white are lies. Nobody's black and nobody's white. Where do you go if you're of mixed race? What bathroom? Well, this is why mixed race marriage is such a bad thing. It clouds this supposedly precious issue that we have of who's on what side and who's on what other side. In my lifetime. This is all going on just 50 short years ago. Evers was assassinated, WikiGod continues, by Byron de la Beckwith, a member of the White Citizens Council, a group formed in 1954 to resist integration of schools and civil rights activity. As a veteran, Evers was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. I must go to that grave. I did not know that till now. His murder and the resulting trials inspired civil rights protests as well as numerous works of art, music, and film. All white juries failed to reach verdicts in the first two trials of Beckwith. He was convicted in a new state trial, get this, in 1994, based on new evidence. 1994? Myrlie Evers, widow of the activist, became a noted activist in her own right, serving as national chair for the NAACP. His brother, Charles Evers, was the first African-American mayor elected in Mississippi in the post-Reconstruction era when he won in 1969 in Fayette. picture here. So I'm going to include this. This beautiful, soulful, down to earth, just decent guy. Medgar Evers, educator, activist. So this is how Bob begins the song, and what he says basically is, well, Medgar was buried with like a king. He says that's full military honors with the gun salutes and the procession and the American flag in the same cemetery as President Kennedy and other presidents. And old Byron, basically is just a tool. He's just a pawn in the game. It's not really him. And there is a flaw in white people being told, again, white being a lie, the white lie, that you have it better, that this is about your privilege. Because what that is about is a divide and conquer technique. And we're seeing this divide and conquer technique being played out every damn day. Every day we're seeing this be played out. And it is very easy to play into it while it is being played out. And so I am not denying, in fact, I will tell you that when I see police in an area or I'm driving by, I know that it is my privilege as someone who can disguise himself as an ordinary white guy, that the chances are the police are generally not interested in me. Then when I get pulled over, which doesn't really happen so much, but it's happened a good few times in the past, but when I get pulled over, I know how to handle myself, and I know they're probably not interested in me. They're probably not going to search my car. They're probably not going to ask me to get out of my car. I know, because I have a little money, that my driving record is clean, and that I know it's going to come back when they run my driver's license. Okay, I have that privilege. But that's not really white privilege. That's a privilege of my class. That's a privilege of my economic status. But that's not really the issue. There's something bigger than all of this acting on us. That something bigger is the thing that sent the United States and England and many other countries to war in Iraq for no reason in 2002. It is in 3. It is the same thing that allowed 9/11 to happen, or facilitated it happening, or made it happen, or engineered it happening, which was a domestic project. A domestic project. The U.S. government will still not come clean about 9/11. Those pages in the report are still secret. Why? That bigger thing is the thing that we're up against. And if we don't get that, we're still going to be fighting on the streets to see who's right and who's wrong, as Elton John has said. It's not about that fight on the streets for who's right and who's wrong. Who's got better corn chips in their cupboard, if you have any corn chips at all. It's not about that. We are under the thrall of something much bigger than ourselves. And as Simone de Beauvoir said of women, she said something, one of the most interesting things in The Second Sex. She said that most women are so conditioned to be at war with themselves that they cannot stand up to the world around them. Because you're busy arguing with yourself and fretting and fighting and worrying. And I would say that most of us who are in this sort of, in society, have been so conditioned to play this black-white game, whether it's being played actively or played on the most sublime level, whether you are a racist cop who thinks it's fine, you're just waiting for your nigger to shoot. You're going to do it one of these days, you're going to get it out of your system. Yeah, your life's going to suck pretty much after that, but hey, you're going to get it out of your... Or you're just someone who quietly gets in your limousine after a day of hard work on the stock exchange. whether you are a polluter who knows that the toxins that you are spreading are affecting everyone, but they're affecting certain people more than others. Young people, by the way. We could easily divide the world as like, what do the older people do to the younger people? We could divide it by black and white. We could divide it by sex. But the truth is, we're all getting the dioxin sprayed on us. It's not just guys in Vietnam in the 1960s. Everyone's getting the dioxin in every bite of food. A little, a lot. Every breath of air. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. And so I think that we who have a modicum of privilege and power and influence, for example, the ability to get in your car and vote, or the ability to take an hour and meet with your congressman, or the ability to participate in your local government on some level, need to get our house in order. And I recognize this is not easy. I know a lot of people in government in my area. I know them from many different things, including the fact that I covered a lot of their activities in the early 1990s, and now I'm kind of like just a citizen astrologer. It's not easy to get influence. It's not easy to have a real conversation, and as you struggle to have that real conversation, you might get a sense of how the lines of power are drawn, i.e., in this equation, you have next to none, and they have it all. And you have maybe your little way of buying some. If someone's in trouble, you know someone's in trouble, maybe you can pay for a lawyer who's actually going to come to court and work the mechanisms on the lower level to get them out. But we might want to make sure that there's judges who aren't lunatics put in. That's difficult, because who actually cares about judicial elections? I mean, do you? Have you ever consciously voted for a judge? Said, that judge will be better than that judge. I must get that judge out of office, and I'm going to vote for that judge. I mean, once ever in your life? So we have that power. We don't use it. There's been this rant I've been wanting to give on the political situation, partly in response to the whole Trump-Sanders phenomenon, which is that this sort of melodrama that we're seeing with the presidential election is, in many ways, I think, a ruse for real work on issues. Maybe it was on Democracy Now! This morning that I listened to someone describing this, like, for example, all these idealist young people working for Sanders, which is easy, right? It's easy. It's easy emotionally. It feels like the right thing, and there's a clear goal, and your little part counts and all that stuff. And she said, this idealism works until one reaches the wall of governance. Like, wow, what a way to put it. I call it, I don't know, I was describing it to a friend a couple of weeks ago, saying, it's all fun and games working for Bernie Sanders until it actually comes down to getting stuff done, till it comes down to making sure the right thing happens. That's what this guest on Democracy Now! Was talking about as the wall of governance, where there is this sort of like picketing outside, and then there's actually the brass tacks of how we make a change, of what actually happens, how we're going to rewrite that law that lets police kill people. How are we going to tackle this issue of the Second Amendment? How are we going to do that? What is that about? Well, I've heard plenty of people say that it's impossible to get a constitutional amendment passed now because you can't really get people to agree on anything. You got to have like 37 or 38 states to get a constitutional amendment passed. That means a majority. You have to, first of all, get the thing floated by Congress somehow. Then There has to be a ratification plan to amend the Constitution. Then, state by state, either, depending on the state, the legislature or a referendum of the people has to adopt that within a given time frame. The Equal Rights Amendment is an amazing example of this. The Equal Rights Amendment, let me just get that. There needs to be more discussion of the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was the last, as in the most recent, attempt to amend the federal Constitution. And this struggle went on from the text. The whole thing starts in 1923, one Uranus-Eris cycle ago, a little bit more, at the Seneca Falls Convention, this famous event. Here's the Equal Rights Amendment. Here's what it said. Section 1. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Period. That's the whole thing. I'll read it again. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The other two are Congress will enforce it, and the amendment shall take effect in 2 years. That couldn't get through. Okay, this simple thing, saying the government can't discriminate on the basis of sex, can't get through. Well, now we're going to rethink the Second Amendment? That is the wall of governance. And this kind of curtain in front of the wall of governance is this whole drama that's put up around elections and Donald Trump spouting, and for that matter, Bernie Sanders, about what they're going to do when they get elected. But they can't do anything when they're elected unless Congress passes a law. You got to get half of Congress, which means 60% of the Senate, and majority of congressional representatives in the House to approve something. That is the wall of governance. And it's not like things don't happen. It's not like laws are not passed. But our civic orientation is so focused on one thing and one thing only, the presidency, that listening to people talk about politics is like asking like a plumber to give a brain surgeon information on how to operate on the brain. There's no significant, useful information that the vast majority of people have about how governance actually takes place. They don't deal with the government. They don't want to deal with the government. It's basically parking tickets in the IRS most of the time. Every now and then something really big happens and you get a speeding ticket. And that's the extent of our relationship to the government. So we're talking about this thing over which we have, about which we have almost no information. Can you name members of your town board? I will tell you right now, I cannot name one member of the Common Council of my city. I'm involved, and I can't name one member of the Common Council. I can't even name my own local Common Councilman. And I'm like Mr. Civics. Well, jeepers. Now, I've kind of given up on city government. I can tell you about the executive branch. I can tell you about some of the judges. But the thing that actually makes the laws for my city, I can't name a single person. Crazy. So this is the wall of governance. How are we going to get there? How are we going to get there? And another question, is that in itself a kind of a ruse? My thinking is, at this point, having observed this, one of the reasons I'm not completely knocked down and drowning in what's going on now is that somewhat soon after the 60s, which remember went through the early 70s, I showed up at a college campus which was profoundly impacted by the events of the 1960s. There was one of three campuses where students were shot in the spring of 70. Kent was one. and SUNY Buffalo was another. There's a third one that I forget. It was down south, where students were shot in the spring of '70, and where the professors were. It seemed like a long time ago to me at the time in the early 80s, but it had just happened. It had just happened, just 10 years before that. And these were young professors I had. So they seemed old because I was really, really young, but they were young guys. And they remembered it, and they told me the story and stories of things. And I have long considered the relationship of the individual to this type of huge social movement. And one of the things about the 1960s was that first of all, most of the people of the 1960s were not quite fully, the people who were involved in the protest movements, not fully the product of television yet. They were still being tribalized by TV and by electronic media. And in many ways, this strange pixelization of television seems to have been involved in the underlying energetics that provoked the war protests, because we were still not completely immune to the effects of TV. We still hadn't cut it off. And what certain well-informed media theorists believe, based on a lot of observation, is that it was the TV set itself that provoked the activism. But I would also contend that they were much more literate people. When you read the lyrics of Bob Dylan, Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, or Pawn in Their Game, that is the work of a wholly literate person. He probably read every book he could get his hands on as a kid and found himself through that process and had context and the ability to put knowledge into context. As we tribalize and we go back to almost exclusively to oral tradition, as we abandon book knowledge, we're abandoning context, we're abandoning the ability to be objective, which a book gives us. A book powerfully focuses the subject-object divide. That has had its problems. But we need that subject-object divide now in order to have any detachment at all now, to be able to see ourselves in relationship to the scenario that we're witnessing. Because otherwise we're just sucked into the mass and struggle to have any concept or any opinions of our own that we feel as an internal thing. Group identity is fragile, and we put a lot of emphasis on group identity right now. It is almost the only thing people are striving for, is this kind of tribal acceptance, rather than striving for the thing that is ultimately going to get us out of this mess, which I believe is cultivating kind of self-actualization. And remember that in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of, going back to the 50s as well, development of psychologies that were supportive of people being inwardly aware, of confronting our inner demons, of confronting our parents, of forming of embarking on the necessary confrontation that led to the strengthening of individual character. It is amazing to me the extent to which people seem to, so many of them, even people I would consider ethical people, lack individual character to the degree where it's not even vaguely easy to say, this is how I feel about this, this is what this means to me, and why it means that to me, for there to be any context around that, besides the wispy opinion of something fleeting by like a television image or something that you just swept past your news feed. That's our model of the sense of self. It is lacking context of the world, and we need to reclaim that. Now, the McLuhans make a very good case for literacy being the most important thing. I would add to that there is a parallel, and I've talked about this a number of times, and I'm going to mention it again, which is that what happens in our relationships is very helpful or very harmful to our ability to stand as individuals. And that in a kind of a desexualizing of several generations of young people, desexualizing meaning the making invisible of sexuality, the not teaching it, basically, of giving a sort of set of opinions that say don't go there, cutting people off from their bodies, cutting people off from their natural instincts, whacking off their inner intonation, has also been profoundly destabilizing. And I would say that one of the messages of the, let's say, the identity formation attribute of Mars in Scorpio is connecting with your sexuality. This is controversial and it is taboo, but I'm noticing that it is becoming gradually, ever so gradually, less controversial and less taboo. But we're still largely in a society dominated by a kind of provincial, quaint provincial ignorance of the most basic facts of sexuality, and embarrassment and shame and guilt about the most basic experiences that we have and that we want to have, or that we have had. And so for as long as we are cut off from that inner source, there is another, let's say, origin to the chaos that we are in. And Mars in Scorpio, in this rarefied position that it is in, is saying, put what belongs in its place, in its proper place. Feel that reality that you are, which is a continuum from conception to death, and then something that happens beyond that, which we don't know for sure. We have no tangible information about that. There's many reports back from the other side, but not enough for there to be anything that we can document or build a consensus about. So what we do have is orientation in our physical body, our physical emotions, our physical feelings, our physical emotional curiosities about ourselves and about each other. And I would say this is a potentially equally powerful and perhaps more efficient, meaning it will take less time, particularly because it's drawing upon a natural instinct to feel one's own being through one's desire nature. And to have our sexual experiences in much more illuminated consciousness than we tend to have them. To, for example, not be so drunk so often, to the point where we don't even remember necessarily. I will tell you that has not happened to me, but it has happened to many people. It's happened to almost everyone, that they've been so drunk they blacked out and don't remember the sexual experience they had. That awesome song by Pitbull and Keisha, Timber, is all about it. The night you won't remember, the night you won't forget. We need to bring more awareness to our sexuality and our sexual feelings and deal with the shame and the embarrassment. Coming from a whole other direction, there is an approach to this whole government puzzle, this power struggle, this tyranny that seems to be rising, that says that it all has its roots in sexual feelings and the way that we deal with them or don't deal with them. Wilhelm Reich makes a brilliantly lucid case for the primary motive of stuffing the sexuality of young people, of suppressing the sexuality of infants and adolescents in particular, is to keep them obedient so that they can then enter society and be obedient. And that obedience, that cooperation with the abuse, that cooperation with the violence, that refusal to stand up, that acquiescence is in itself the direct product of sexual suppression for the purpose of making children obedient. Because children who are not sexually suppressed tend to be less obedient and more internally directed. They have a stronger internal locus of control. Because this core point of orientation is still intact. Now, I say this, and I say it somewhat encouragingly, recognizing the profound pain and betrayal that many people feel from sexuality, as if nothing good could ever come from opening up to their sexuality. There are a great many people who feel this way, and my heart goes out to you. And I will share whatever resources I can reasonably share with you if you want to work through that. And there are many people who have been betrayed by relationship, and there are many people where the confluence of relationship and sexuality has led to nothing but misery, or so it seems. And we have to get past that, because for that and many other reasons, we must trust one another. And if we're ever going to trust one another, that is going to include trust on the sexual level. We try to do these things and make safe areas and say we're going to have trust except for that one thing that's the most troubling thing. Well, we need to take the most troubling thing and start to question it in relationship to the whole issue of trust and trusting one another, and what it means for someone to have had their profound inner sanctuary cut off by having their sexuality attacked when they were very young. And this is the way that it's done. And this has many effects. And if you have never contemplated the fact that suppressing the sexuality of an infant leads to someone who doesn't care that an innocent person is getting electrocuted by the state, I would encourage you to look for the connection. It is not pretty, but there is a lot of healing, maybe the very core element of healing to be had in the recognition that our inner compass is essentially a sexual barometer of some kind. It's mixing my metaphors there, but the orientation on existence that we have, magnetic north, should rightly be the sex that created us. The understanding that we were created by sex. And how many times have you been able to imagine the sex that your parents had to create you? Have you ever been able to really be there and feel that as something good and something beautiful? Where are you at with the, therefore, anyone else's sex being good and beautiful? Can you be at peace with that? Can you love that? Can you get turned on by the beautiful experiences that other people have? And can you get turned on by the beautiful experiences that you have and that you want? The fact that this has been taken away from us, I think, and by the way, this shows up absolutely nowhere in the media analysis theory that I have been working with such passion and love and great success. It's not there. This needs to come from other quarters, from other contemporaneous philosophies that break this particular issue down. There is a whole other world which you might think of as the inner environment, and the way in which the inner environment is inherently sexual, and which that inner environment has been corrupted and taken away from nearly everyone. And it may well be that this imposition of literacy and then the imposition of electronic media and all that have their ability to work so effortlessly, really. We just come under their thrall. I mean, and that's it, pretty much. You know, the phone comes out, and suddenly we're in a society of little zombies walking around staring at their phone, not noticing what's on the street around them, not even necessarily caring. And the vulnerability to that, the susceptibility to that may, I'm proposing this, involve a previous loss facilitated by a previous cutting off of a primal orientation on existence, on something as basic as night and day. And with that in mind, I would leave it to you to consider embarking on your own conscious path of sexual healing and of allowing yourself some room to open up and to experience and explore the things that you want to experience and explore. And perhaps to see if that doesn't take off some of the pressure that you feel, the anxiety that you feel, the depression that you feel, the struggle, the blockage, all of the things that people tell me about. The confusion, the sense of being in unsupportive relationships that also happen to be sexually dead and sexually restrictive. And the kind of the burning ember at the core of all curiosity being sexual curiosity. And when the sexual curiosity is extinguished, that just makes it very difficult to experience the curiosity that we need to experience life in a way that helps us discover ourselves as we move through the strange and beautiful journey here on the cosmic physical plane. That's what I have to say to you. I'm going to leave the rest to Sir Bob Dylan, someone whose work I love a little more every day. And this is one of my favorites of all time, and it is called Chimes of Freedom. Back with you soon. Thanks for tuning in. Big love. Bye for now.